in their money to have a hull built for themselves, and the other guys helped them. A couple of the guys Kendall had hired because the guys agreed to let Kendall advertise and sell hulls and decks, or hulls and his partial pieces of deck. And Kendall did 31 boats before the bank closed down on him and cut off his line of credit, and the poor guy had to file bankruptcy, which is what actually happened. So they put the boat up, his yard up, or what he had, which was molds and some scaffolding and some, not much else. Put it up for auction, and as the story goes, Snyder and his wife were looking to get into the boat building business, and she was in the advertising business. Snyder was a engineer working for some company in San Diego, and they went over and talked to Kendall, and they liked it. And he says, "I'll tell you," and Kendall said, "I got 2 boats on order, and of course if I go bankrupt, I can't build them." And so Snyder said, "Well, tell you what, Larry, if I can get the boats or the company at the auction, I'll hire you and I'll put up the money and we'll build these 2 boats." Because the guys that wanted those 2 boats wanted a trunk cabin like the Westsails have, rather than the flush deck like the Kendalls had. So as the story goes, and I can't verify this, but I've heard it, the auctioneer said, "Okay, bid's open." And Snyder says $1,000, and the auctioneer said, "Close."
What?
And the other guys that wanted to bid said, "What do you mean?" It's over, the auctioneer said.
Really?
Well, Snyder had also made a deal with the bank to pay off part of Larry's loan, so it was a done deal. So he had Larry build a trunk cabin on hull number 33. They pulled the mold off of it, laid up a deck, put it on hull number 32, and they finished off those 2 boats. 32 as a cutter with a wood mast, 33 as a ketch with a pair of wooden masts. And then Larry quit. About that time, they had an order for 4 finished boats, and the 8 or 9 guys, none of them wanted to be the foreman. Each one was actually building his own boat, and they were all sitting out there in the yard. And so I was hired to build those first 4 boats. So I came on, and I talked to the guys. I says, "Look, I know each of you guys have got your own little scratch pad, and you build your part of the boat the way you want it. But," he says, we've got to build some sort of a production system here where the boats are regular, or, areas are regular. We'll offer 2 interiors, one with a center table and one with a dinette. But the forward stateroom, the galley, the engine room, everything else is going to be the same." Okay. Most of the guys said, "Okay, yeah, we'll work for you." One guy says, "Screw you, Taplin, I don't want to work for you." And that guy was named Ron Vossler. They called him Boomer. Who knows why they called him Boomer? So he left. And so we started Westsail, and we started going, and it got pretty good. And about a year later, I get a call. "Yeah, who's this?" This is Boomer." "What's up, Boomer?" He says, "Well, I'm not mad anymore. I think you've done a pretty good job over there." He says, "I want to build a bigger boat. I want to build a 34-footer. He says, I said, what are you going to do?" He said, "I'm just going to add 2 foot in the middle to the original." "Okay." I said, "I suggest you add 4 feet and make a 36. And he says, No. 34 is big enough." Okay. So he had a partner of his by the name of Fred, and I don't remember Fred's last name. Fred was a musician, played music at one of the little bars in Newport, in Costa Mesa. Well, Ron built the hull mold, the plug, and he called me about getting materials and so on. So I helped him buy some materials at my cost, because I knew, you know, he was working by himself. And he finally built the deck. He did the hull mold, and his idea was it's going to be like the Kendall's, flush deck with a little well in the front and the cockpit in the back. Well, Ron and Fred put an ads out. They wound up selling what, 7 boats? Is it?
7.
7, is it? Yeah. And then they ran out of business. They ran out of money, and they ran out of time and effort and everything else. So another company took over the molds, and they wound up continuing to build another, I don't know, 10 or 12 or 15 boats. I don't know what they called them, but they built the deck mold. It was a nice little boat though, and I've got drawings of it. But anyhow, that's the way the sort of Westsails wound up being built, and we've got 2 of the owners here that have those Windjammer. Now, he used the same mast and rigging, or at least he proposed using them, the same 43-foot mast and bowsprit and bumpkin that the Westsails had. But because each boat was sold to some individual, some of them built them a certain way, some didn't, and so on. But that was the story of that's the story of the Windjammer. The Kendall that's here, Kendall built laminated 31 hulls and decks, hulls and the little fiberglass forward area, bow piece, and the cockpit. But those people all built their own boats. Kendall didn't actually build any of those, to my knowledge. And I talked to Larry about this.
Can you tell me when he got the mold made, did he somehow use the Westsail 32 mold, or did he come from scratch?
Well, he used the drawings that Bill Krelock had developed, and as far as I can see, as I remember, he built his own wooden plug, as we call it, which is an upside down hull, but built lightly with plywood, with frames and a backbone, and then covered with small strips of wood with a convex, concave, so they could plank it with that, and then they glass over it, smooth it all out, and make a mold from that. Now that original hull they scrap, because it really isn't a strong hull anyhow. That the wood frame or the wood plug that they build. So that's the way, as far as I know, that's what he did.
So he didn't necessarily use the Westsail 32 molds, but he used the drawings?
He couldn't use the Westsail 32 molds because he wasn't working for Westsail, and they didn't want to have anything to do with him.
Well, plus he was stretching it, right?
Besides he was adding 2 foot to it.
Yeah.
So couldn't just take the Westsail plug and add 2 feet to that plug, and then
You have to cut it
Well,
half
but-
and stretch it.
But the Westsail plug was long gone
Oh, yeah, I suppose.
because it wasn't
Yeah.
really a hull.
yeah.
The plugs are never a real hull. My last project at Westsail was to supervise the construction of the plug and the molds for the 42. And that,
Can you tell us more about the person, Ron Bosworth?
about the what?
The person. Why did this guy that used to own my boat say it was the scariest day in his life that he gave that guy some money?
Well, that I really don't know.
What was he like? Was he
Who was that now?
Boomer?
Oh, Boomer.
What was Boomer like?
He was a good guy. He was a hell of a good boat builder, but a hell of a lousy business guy. And his partner Fred was pretty good, pretty sharp businessman, but it was pretty hard to control Boomer with what he wanted to do. And it was Boomer's ideas that went into the Windjammer. And they put some ads out, and they managed to sell 7 boats.
So did they have a company name?
Windjammer Yachts.
That was
Windjammer Yachts.
Yeah, that was Windjammer Yachts.
But who was it that redesigned the Kendall to make the cabin top for Westsail? Who was that again?
Larry did. Larry Kendall did that for Snyder.
He designed. Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah,
He
the
designed
trunk cabin.
The trunk cabin.
The Westsail used.
And they built one out of wood on hole number, and they set it on hole number 33.
Oh, okay.
And then they glassed it and pulled the mold off of it and used that mold to laminate hole number 30, a deck for, and that they put on hole number 32. Now number 33 is sitting down there in Richmond, California, and it's going to be at the Westsail Rendezvous, which we're having next weekend. And I asked the owner, why don't you come on over? He says, well, there's no engine in the boat. I said, well, the guys will tow it over, because you got to remember, this is Mama Westsail.
That's a historic boat.
This is Mama Westsail. If it weren't for her, you wouldn't have a boat. So we'll see what happens. I don't know if they'll bring it over or not, or somehow or other get it over to where the rest of the boats are. Either that or have everybody go over to wherever his slip is.
So what you're saying is the deck mold that for the Westsail 32 that with the raised house was a Larry Kendall thing.
Yeah, Larry Kendall. Snyder told Larry, he says, I'll give you the money, you do the work, and build a trunk cabin boat, trunk cabin deck, so that we can build these two boats that these people want and they're paid for, or they've got the money for.
So he designed it and everything too, or
Yeah, Larry did.
And Bill Krelock didn't design the trunk cabin.
No, Bill Krelock didn't design the
just
trunk
the
cabin.
rig, just
They
the-
went to Bill Krelock initially. What happened was Larry, he had built some wooden boats, and then he decided he wanted a boat built in this new material called fiberglass. Okay, this was in about 1965 or 6, something like 7, something like that. So he got the word out among some of his buddies, and he got about 4 guys or 5 guys that all wanted one of these hulls. So they made a deal. They said, look, we'll pick a hull that we like, and we'll each put in a certain amount of money and our labor to build the plug and the mold, and then each guy will put up his own money for his materials for his hull, and everybody will jump in there and help him laminate that hull. And we'll do it for the 4 or 5 guys. I don't know, it was 4 or 5 guys. So they just picked the Atkins 32, and they went to Bill Krelock.
Which was called an Eric, right?
It was called Eric, yeah. They went to Bill Krelock and said, what should the hull look like? And Bill says, well, I'm not going to change the lines much because it's good lines. He says, but I'll spec out what I think the material thickness should be and how many layers below the waterline, how many above the waterline, etc. Okay. So he did that, and the guy said, well, okay, I mean, we're not sure how this material works, so they laid up a panel of the material, of the amount of material that Bill Krelock had recommended. They pulled it out and they cut it in half, and they looked at the thickness of it, and they said, that ain't thick enough, man. That doesn't look like the wood that we would put on, this ain't right. Okay, so they laid up another one with a couple of more layers. Well, they cut it and they looked at it, well, that's getting to look better. So then they did a couple of more layers. He says, now, yeah, that's looking pretty good. So that's the engineering that went into the Westsail hull. And it stayed that same engineering despite the fact that in 1974, after the resin crisis and everything else, one of the material costs had gone up, and somebody recommended, well, let's just leave out a couple of layers. So they asked me what they'd save. And I did a quick calculation. I said, well, we'll save about $1,000. Well, let's do it. And it was Lynn Vick that piped up. And she says, look, she says, from a marketing standpoint, if the word ever gets out that after hull number 120 or whatever it was, is laid up thinner than the other ones, she says sales are going to get killed. Well, what did we do? Add another $1,000 to the price. That's what they did. So to my knowledge, the Westsail's always had that well overbuilt hull thickness, which has served it in good stead over the years. Because as they found out that osmosis got in and into the outer layers and caused bubbles and all that stuff, the Westsails, it occurred out in the outer 1/8 of an inch. But the Westsails are anywhere from 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch thick below the waterline. So it isn't a structural problem. The boat builders that used a core of balsa or foam with a 3/8 outer layer and a 1/4 inch inner layer, very rigid, but when there's an 1/8 of an inch or a little over of blistering on that outer layer, it's halfway through the laminate. That's a different story. So when people ask me, when I do a survey and there's some blisters on it, I say either leave them alone or let the hull thoroughly dry out, dig them out, and fill them. But I says, you're really not doing anything other than spending some money to make it cosmetically smoother. Leave them alone. And that's, you know, and virtually all of the boats laminated with polyester resin have eventually blistered. When they switched over to epoxy resin or what's the other one?
Vinyl ester.
There's another resin that they use.
Vinyl ester.
Vinyl ester or something. Then that eliminated the blistering problem. But the blistering was probably caused by, in the early 74, we had a resin that oil embargo in the Mideast, and the guys making fiberglass resin out of petroleum weren't able to get it, and the boat builders started suffering because they couldn't get they couldn't get the resin. And of course Westsail was in that same boat. So I remember during that time we'd get a call from one of the bootleggers saying, "Hey, I got $1,000. I got 1,000 gallons of resin. I'll sell you." Okay, how much? And they agreed on a price. I say, "Okay, bring it over midnight," and we'd tell 4 or 5 of the guys, "Hey, you're working the midnight shift tonight. You can take tomorrow off. Be at the boatyard before midnight." They'd open the back gate, and the tanker truck would come in, and they'd have, 150 barrels or whatever it took. Well, the 50 gallons per barrel, whatever it is, and they spend 2 or 3 hours and put it into the barrels. They'd split a couple of 6-packs of beer. The cash would pass hands. The truck would leave. The guys would lock the gate, and then they'd go home. So when the laminating crew came in the morning, they always tested each barrel before they used it to determine how much catalyst was going to be necessary for that particular drum. But because of that, you never know what you're going to have. I think that's what caused a lot of the blistering that came about in the 74, 75 time period.
I was
But,
telling Bud earlier that 5 years ago we took our boat out of the water and put it in our
Yeah.
yard, and I took sharp chisels and I took everything right back to the bare gel coat versus a 75. There wasn't a blister on that at all.
See,
So we got lucky, I guess, but
dependent-
no blister.
depending upon the temperature of the water, the boats that were up in the north, like in the northeast, they didn't have blisters.
Okay.
And I've talked to owners who took their boat down to Florida, and the next time they hauled it, there was a whole bunch of blisters.
Oh yeah,
So I think that the water temperature also had something to do
could be.
with the blistering starting to occur.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's the story.
Cool. It's great.
I still have the original
bill of sale signed by Ferent Matei, 1974, 10 grand.
Yeah, well, Ference was hired. He came to Westsail and said, "Hey, I'm a writer, and how about if I write a book about the construction of these boats?" And called, from a
Bear
what was
Hall.
it called?
Bear-
From a Bear Hall.
Yeah.
So Lindvik says, "That's a good marketing thing. We'll publish it." And so they wound up hiring him as a. I think he worked in the stock room, and was writing his book, of course, and taking pictures and doing a lot of stuff. And of course, he ordered a hull and deck from them, and there was a little boatyard, do-it-yourself area down in Newport Beach, and 4 or 5 of the owners of the kits put their boats down there, including Ference. The guys at Westsail worked 4-day week, 4 days 10 hours. So they had basically Friday and Saturday free. So these guys would go down and talk to the owners down there and say, "Hey, we'll work on your boat. You pay us cash." And that's what they did. And that's what Ference did. And he wrote the book. He designed what he wanted in the boat, and he had the guys build it for him.
Oh, interesting.
So that's the way that
Interesting.
that Ference and Westsail published that first book, and that helped the sales naturally. And then I, of course, created the construction manual on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, of step by step by step, because that was my background of of how to build a boat, and that became the construction manual that went along with the kit boats, and also it was the instructions for the guys in the shop on, especially the new guys, wanting to learn how to put the cap rails on, or how to put the gudgeons on, or exactly where they went, and so on. And if they followed the instructions, it got in the right place, and if they were smoking dope that day, it didn't get in the right place. You never know. But that's the way it went.
So I also have a whole pile of blueprints. Did people that do the kit boat, do they all get the blueprints or what?
No, the people that wanted the blueprints, what they did was they took this roll of visqueen plastic, they rolled it out, and from the woodworking shop, they laid every pattern on it and traced around it and marked it, A13. And the construction manual showed part A13, and then it's somewhere further down it showed this is where you install part A13. So this was a do-it-yourself manual. But we did that for the convenience of the guys in the shop, but it also became something that the owners could use when they were building their own boats. And that's what helped sell a lot of kits. Plus Lindvik's promotion that says, buy one of our kits, and in a few easy weekends with some hand tools, you'll have a boat just as nice as a finished one. Yeah, that's exactly what everybody
You
was
only
saying.
did it with a single Allen wrench.
Yeah, exactly. So, but that's what sold boats. And Westsail always made money on the kits, because the kits could be put together in a week or less, laminated, all the parts that the owner wanted with it, even putting the ballast in and the main bulkheads if he wanted that, hung the rudder if he wanted it. If he didn't, we wouldn't do it. We'd just give him everything that he needed. And they could get paid within a week, even before they had to pay the labor, much less the materials. But the finished boats, they were losing money on, because by hiring new people, I kept track of the man hours, and we got down with a good crew before we started trying to really pump up production. We could do a complete boat, a finished boat, in 1,500 man hours, not counting lamination. And after we started hiring a bunch of people, then the good guys were spending half of their time either teaching the new guy or fixing things that the new guy screwed up. And the labor went up to 2,400 man hours. Well, I did a cost analysis, and early 74, maybe it was mid 74. And I kind of figured, and I didn't know all the overhead in the company, but I knew what the production costs were. And I kind of figured that now the boats were costing a minimum of $23,000-24,000 to build. And I brought it up at one of our Monday morning meetings, that I says, I think we got a problem here. Well, what is it, Bud? Well, we've hired a lot of new guys, and resin costs have gone up, and this, that, and the other. And I says, I think the boats are now costing us at least $23,000-24,000 to put together a finished boat. Kit's no problem, don't worry about it. Well, the sales manager says, well, Bud, what's the problem? He says, I just took an order yesterday for $35,000. I says, well, Jerry, the problem is that boat that you took an order for isn't going to be built for another year because of our backlog. I says, when number 125 comes off the line, you're going to call that owner and say your boat's ready now, come bring in the rest of your money. And his bill of sale was $23,000, $24,000, $25,000. So he says, we're losing money on every sale. Well, that's when I stuck my foot in my mouth, naturally. When Sherry says, well, what do we do? And I says, well, it's easy. When I tell you 125 is done, don't call the guy that ordered it. Call the guy you took $35,000 from yesterday. Give it to him. Well, that didn't go over with management, naturally. So Snyder then put me to work on he hired a new production manager, and he put me to work on building the 42 molds. And as soon as those were done, Snyder said, Bud, I no longer need you. Well, anyhow. But it was interesting because I hired away one after I started my own custom built boat building business. I hired away one of the salesmen from Westsail because he said, hey, I got a lady that wants a Westsail 42 custom built. And I said, well, that's what I'm doing for a living, so come on over and you can be my new salesman. And I said, Jerry, I mean, what's going on over there? He says, they knew they were losing money. So he says, what the salesmen were doing was they'd call the guy that ordered 125, and they say, hey, well, your boat's ready to go. And the guy would say, well, I don't quite have all my money together yet, and so on. And I'm it's going to take me a little while to get my money together. He had a deposit in, that's all. So Jerry would say, hey, tell you what, I'm going to buy you dinner down at Delaney's Seafood Restaurant in Newport Beach tomorrow night. Come on down about 6 o'clock. Okay. Then he'd call the guy that was in the day before that said, I'll pay $35,000, but I don't want to wait a year. He says, he'd tell that guy, hey, tell you what, meet me at Delaney's tomorrow night, I'll buy you dinner. He'd get down there, he'd get the two guys together, and he says, look, if you take delivery of the boat at 28 or 26, and this guy will pay you 35 or whatever, so there's an extra, $7,000-8,000. He says, you give me a couple of thousand, and I'll work the paperwork. And that's what they were doing.
Oh, wow.
Well, who lost in that deal? The company. Both of the potential boat owners were happy. The salesman was happy. Plus, the guy that originally took the order for that $25,000 boat, he got whatever commission he was due. So who was losing money? And that's why they threw me out of Westsail. Because the company was losing money. And I talked to some pretty astute businessmen I knew at the time, and they said, it's not going to take but more than about a couple of years, and they're going to go bankrupt, owing $8 or $10 million. Because when I left in late 74, there was, I don't know, a couple of hundred boats on order, a couple of $1 million in deposits sitting in the bank. But in spring of 77, they were almost $10 million in the hole. And there was no money there to build the boats that had been ordered. And they filed bankruptcy. a lot of people lost a lot of money, including a lot of suppliers. But that's the way it went. But it wasn't my problem then.
What year was the last one made?
Well, spring of '77 is when they filed bankruptcy. March of '77. The production manager that took over from me had his Dutch relatives put up the money, and they put in a bid to the bankruptcy office, whatever it's called, and by August or September, they gave it to them. There was a group of guys that wanted to buy the company that way, and they called me and they asked me if they bought the company, would I be the new production manager? I said, sure will. But their bid was contingent upon there not being any unknown obligations. And the only one that they knew that if there were any unknown obligations was the production manager that was there. So the bankruptcy court gave the thing to him. Now he ran it for another 2 years, 77, yeah. Spring, sometime in 1980, he had built another 200-300 boats, something like that. And they basically ran out of orders because they didn't have the marketing clout that Lynn Vick had. They were riding on the original advertising upbeat and the backlog that Snyder and Lynn had created. And so they shut down in the spring of '80. They didn't go bankrupt, they just shut down.
That was just due to lack of sales.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Lack of sales.
Wow.
Because there were a lot of other boats on the market by then, and there were a lot of reasons. And the Westsail had basically run its course
Yeah.
for that style of boat. Now, there were a couple of companies that made basically copies of it, like the Tiana and some of the others, built in Taiwan, and they were bringing those in at less money. And so that's where the market went.
But
So-
Lynn Vick's original advertising, I mean, there were like the other ones that Lynn Party, those people, that Lyle Hess designed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but her original
Well-
marketing really got all those other little guys going.
That's right. Well,
I mean, it
Lynn
got the
Vick.
dream going for everybody.
Lynn Vick knew advertising, and there's an article in my book. In fact, I've got some of the books here if anybody still wants to buy one. I've still got a few left. Lynn Vick knew marketing, and she said, look, in all these boating magazines, the manufacturer shows their sailboat with this great big sail in front, heeled over, just screaming through the water. Well, she says, as far as I'm concerned, they're advertising the sail manufacturers. They're not advertising their boat. Instead, her advertising was, there's this Westsail 32 or 42 sitting in a quiet lagoon and this tropical island behind, and there's some suntanned couple or a couple and kids, and they're sitting in the cockpit eating something, or drinking food, or diving over the side. She was selling the lifestyle.
Yeah.
And in the 70s, that period from about 70 to late 70s, early 70s to late 70s, it was the lifestyle that was being sold. People were buying condos, people were buying timeshares, and the motorhome industry was going wild because people had the money. The parents that had built or purchased a $10,000 house, that house was now worth $50,000 or $60,000 or $70,000, and they could sell the house, buy one of these boats for $25,000 or $30,000, and still have money left over to live the lifestyle. So that's the appeal that she wrote, that she sent. There's one of the articles in my book written by Advertising Age magazine editor, and he did a critique of her advertising, and as he said, well, here, Lynn, this was what she wrote. Oh boy, too dark. But anyhow, it was, you know, live the lifestyle. You know,
There you go.
take off. Oh, go. Okay, here.
Then you're
Here.
wearing a bunch of sailors,
Here.
so everybody has a bloody flashlight.
To pioneer the oceans, to live aboard the sea, to weather the storm, to reward yourself, to get to know your family, to live a different kind of life, no matter what you earn, to join the Westsail family. Powerful words.
Well, it's so
And that's
mean
what's
when I
and
was
that's what
25
sold
years
people. And of course, saying, hey, with a few hand tools and
And a few hands.
and some bands and a table saw, you can build one of these boats. Buy a kit.
The guy in the video that they made could build a boat.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. Westsail put together a really great promotion of the promo video. It's online if you want it, or I've got video copies of it. But it basically showed a guy starting to try and build and, you know, learning a little bit, and then it switched over to a couple sailing the boat and another couple with their on a 42 with their kids diving over and swimming and walking around and meeting people. I mean, it was tremendous promo, and they really never said during the whole promo what boat it was, but it was obvious. And then the other thing that really helped them was an editor from Time magazine ordered a boat, and he decided to do an article in Time of this lifestyle change, and there were a number of boats featured in the article, and of course Westsail was one of them, and that really helped production. I talked to one guy that was a salesman, and he was flying somewhere, and he picked up this copy of Time magazine, and by the time the flight was over, he picked up the phone and called and ordered a boat because it was just right for him. He wound up sailing that boat around the world, his Westsail. So, you know, it was a tremendous advertising campaign that Lynn Vick, because she was in the business, and one of the things that happened was they themselves took a lot of money out of the business by paying her advertising agency to do the advertising. So they came out okay, even though a lot of other people lost a lot of money. But, you know, that's the way it goes.
That's the way boat building companies go, from my experience with several yacht manufacturers. I mean, the arc is the same.
Yeah.
Even today. Half
Well,
the same ones.
and part of it was,
Vertic types, it's all
yeah.
the same.
part of it was they were, by 74 or 5, they were a major force in the boat building industry. But they were still running the company as a mom and pop operation like they started. They just didn't want to hire, you know, professional help and professional this and so on. And they were still taking fixed price deposits instead of open-end contracts. But that was their downfall.
But what was your impression of Bob Perry at the time, who designed the
Bob, well,
Diana and stuff?
they hired Bob Perry
39 too.
to design a 39 right towards the end. And Bob Perry designed a nice 39, and they built the plug and the molds, and they laminated about 7 or 8 or 9 boats by the time they folded their tent. And of course, Hans kept going for another few years, but he says, I'm not building any of those 39s, because he just didn't think there was a market for them, because it was basically a typical Perry boat, like most of the other Passports and some of the others that he designed. Nice boat. But that mold was sold at the auction, and Ed Parker bought the mold for the 39, also the 32. And he got a call from Bob Perry one day, and Bob Perry says, hey, you know, that boat I designed, and what's his name? Think of his name in a minute. Guy that bought it said, yeah. He says, what are you going to do with that mold? He said, I'm going to laminate some boats and so on. And Perry said, well, you know, you're going to have to pay me a commission because I never got my commission on each boat that Westsail promised. And Ed Parker said, hey, I bought this at the auction, at a bankruptcy auction. I don't owe you a dime, clunk. Well, from then on, Bob Perry really knocked the Westsail. All the Westsails. Not necessarily his boat wasn't being built. Years later, Ed Parker laminated 5 or 6 of the 39s. Then he shipped the molds over to Taiwan, and he contracted with a boat builder over there, and they built a couple of boats for him. He and his family lived there, supervised the construction. And then he shipped them back to the States, and he came back with his family, and he says, I'm done with Taiwan. So the boat builder over there started promoting it, and these guys in San Pedro decided they wanted to they wanted to be boat brokers, have a boat. So they contracted with that yard over there to use those molds. And they took the W off the hull stripe, and they called them the Fairweather Mariner 39. And they imported, I don't know, 15 or 20, 25 boats, whatever it was. They were good. And now Bob Perry then started promoting the Fairweather Mariner 39 because, hey, it's his design. And then eventually he came around to say, especially after Dave King raced his boats and beat some of his designs on the Transpac and some of the others, and there were some races down in off the coast of Florida or off the coast of Texas down to Yucatan, where Westsails did real well. They did well on corrected time if the guy knew how to sail and paid attention, had good sails. So Perry eventually came around and said, yeah, that Westsail 32 is okay. And the 42. Now, Randy Leisure is doing a video, a nice video called Westsail the World. And he's about 2 years into it, something like that. I think at least 2 years into it. He's got a buddy of his that does videos for commercially, and his buddy said, yeah, I'll help you. And Randy did some crowdfunding and got some money ahead. And his group, the photographer and the radio and the video guy, and the sound guy, they all came down Newport Beach and to my office, to the Westsail Parts Company World Headquarters, which is my office in my home, and they shot videos of me, and then they borrowed a couple of the Westsails down at Dana Point, and they shot videos there and did interviews. And then Randy been going to the Rrendezvous, of course, especially the San Francisco one because he lived there, and he shot videos. They shot videos of the boats out sailing. And then he went and he talked to Snyder Vic, and he and the guys went down to Belize and interviewed Snyder and Lynn on their Westsail 42 down in Belize. They got a hold of Larry Kendall, who lived in New Jersey, and they went and had a long conversation with Kendall. They went over to England and talked to Robin Knox Johnson and got a video and interview of him, and there's a couple others. So when that eventually is done, and who knows when Randy's going to have it done, he's been going to rendezvous and shooting videos of the rendezvous and the action that goes on and the interaction between people. He's trying to do a really good video project. Now, I started my Westsail the World book about the same time he started his video thing, and it took me about 1.5 years to put the book together, and he's still going. And who knows when it's come out. He did put out a teaser
The teaser's really good.
Yeah, and the teaser is mostly me and,
Yeah,
and Bob
mostly-
Noblo and a couple of the other guys. That was the very first part of it.
Yeah, look it up on.
So that teaser is on the Owners Association website.
What's it called?
Westsail the World
Rest of the world.
by Randy Leisure. So
Bud talking about the smell of resin and the smell of marijuana.
that was Costa Mesa in the 70s.
Costa Mesa in
down
the
a
70s.
down Placentia Avenue, which my house was down towards the end of Placentia Avenue, right a half a block off, and there must have been 5 or 6 fiberglass boat builders on Placentia Avenue in a stretch of about, I don't know, 20 blocks or so. McGregor Yachts, McGlasson Marine, Islander Yachts, Newport Yachts,
Westsail.
Crystal Liner, and a couple others. I can't remember their names now.
Coronado.
Well, yeah, that was part of Catalina. Catalina Yachts. No, Catalina wasn't there. The Coronado Catalina.
What about Ranger?
But no, Ranger wasn't there. But what's his name? That had the Columbia line was there. Eventually, they all, as their business expanded, they moved away because there was just a very limited amount of space on up and down Placentia Avenue. But back in the early 70s, I mean, there was, of course, it was a big. They had mostly Mexicans doing the lamination, and mostly hippies doing the construction. McGregor I worked for, and same thing with Westsail. But you know, every once in a while, the word would go out down the street, La Miga's coming, the immigration is coming, and these boat yards would clear out. The guys would dive into the dumpsters. They'd run and scatter in every direction they could, because who knows which one of the boat yards the immigration was going to hit to try and pick up a bunch of illegals. But hey, that's the way it went.
So, but question, what was it about Costa Mesa back then that?
What was the what?
What was it about Costa Mesa that attracted all this?
Well,
building?
back in the late 60s, there was a company, and I can't remember the name of the company. They started building fiberglass fishing boats, launches. And they were the ones that kind of were in the forefront of building it out of fiberglass. Now, all these companies were building fiberglass boats.
Right.
There had been a lot of wood building custom boats in the Costa Mesa area, because it was right up the hill from Newport Beach where you could launch the boat, but the rent was cheaper up in Costa Mesa, which was right up the hill from Newport Beach. But there were a half a dozen wood, what's his name? Lapworth design, Chapman Collision, building their 39s, which was a great boat. And 2 or 3 other, Dittmar Donaldson building big sport fishing boats. So there was a lot of woodworking, Squeaky Geezy building schooners on the corner there, build these wooden schooners. And there were a number of do-it-yourself yards where people could get some advice from a competent boat builder who was building his own boat and teaching teaching people or instructing them and getting paid for helping them build their boats. So all over Costa Mesa there was a lot of wood boats being built. And then they started getting into the fiberglass, and they found out that if you can build a fiberglass hull, either a one-off or out of a mold, it just simplified the construction time tremendously. And to build the interior or the deck on it is relatively easy compared to building a hull. And that made the difference. And that was an area. I mean, now Costa Mesa, the city fathers have forced all the boat builders out of the area, and there's none left. I mean, there's a couple of laminating shops, and there's still surfboard builders around there, but there's no boat building going on to speak of in Costa Mesa anymore. But there was a real heyday during the 70s between the the resin and the resin and the marijuana smoke from all the pot that the hippies were smoking.
Well, was aerospace close to
Yeah,
Costa Mesa?
that's what I was
there
gonna
a lot
say.
of aerospace going on?
Aerospace? You mean the?
Like Boeing is in
Oh,
Huntington
Boeing. Well,
Beach.
see, that was about not more than 10, 15 miles up the road, where the aircraft manufacturers were.
I mean, was that an impact, or did that have?
Not
anything?
really.
No?
Not really.
Did-
Other than you could buy metal cheap in their leftover yards, which they had a lot of those.
I've heard about in some of the fiberglass yards up in BC that they were moved out for fire reasons.
Well, yeah, I mean, and
People
see,
were worried about a fire.
by the late '70s, here comes the EPA and the
OSHA.
Yeah, OSHA, and it just became because the boat yards were dangerous places. I mean, with these open scaffolds and resin and smell going in the air, and nobody wearing masks
hide it, yeah.
and all that stuff. So, they started clamping down,
And our local big one.
and the boat builders started moving out,
Oh, yeah.
They got smart.
or they built nice facilities somewhere else where the land was a lot cheaper. So that's what happened. But it was a great run, I'll tell you. It was fun. It was really fun.
That's a great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
So anybody, if you want any other, hey, I'll be here basically most of the day tomorrow because we're not catching a ferry till the evening, early evening. So I'll be here all day and be more than happy to sell you a copy of the book or look at your boat or try and answer any questions you got. So I'll be around all day tomorrow. Because that's basically my advertising budget is going to the Rendezvous. Because what else do I spend it on other than maintaining my websites? That's it. And doing the mailings for the Rendezvous, which is what I figure is my contribution to the Rendezvous is I do the mailings. Put together the flyer, and it's usually cost me around $200, $250 to do the mailing. By the time you print everything and pay for the postage and lick all the envelopes and put it all together, it takes me a couple hours. Well, it takes half a day, really. But what the heck? What else have I got to do?
Well, Bud will do your mini survey and you mini surveyed my boat and you just shake the rigging. You're like, this is too tight. I told you to loosen it last year.
Oh yeah.
I'm
So if you want me to point out things that need to be fixed on your boat, just let me know. I'll point them out. I've got our newbies are 2-week-old new owners that I'm going to spend some time with them on their boat.